I'm Karen Abrams. Welcome to tonight's workshop. I am the treasurer of MORE, which stands for Movement in Omaha for Racial Equity, and we're an Omaha-based nonprofit. We fight for anti-racism and for racial equity through education and advocacy and engagement, like this kind of event. And we're here tonight to talk with Dr. Donna Polk. She's the CEO of the Nebraska Urban Indian Health Coalition. And I am joined by my colleague on the MORE board, Alex Johnson, who's going to be a co-interviewer with me. And we've got our board chair is here as well, Ajmal Bindin. You can wave at everybody. And if some other board members join, we'll let you know. So right now you are joining us for a conversation with Dr. Donna Polk, who has said that her own personal experiences with racism and oppression are what animate her own anti-racist activism and her fight for Native American health and well-being at the Nebraska Urban Indian Health Coalition. So without much more ado, whatever the word is, I'm going to let Donna say hi and also let Alex introduce himself.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. And it is such an honor to be here tonight, to have an opportunity to engage in this conversation about a very important topic. I really am so honored that people would want to listen, and I see friends and associates, Carrie, Coalition RX, and of course Ajmal, and I saw Sister Cynthia and Christy Hargesheimer. Oh my goodness. And I'm sure there are others that whose name I can't see now, but I just want to say, hey, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Delighted to have you here. Alex, do you want to say hello?
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Alex Johnson. As Karen mentioned, I'm a MORE board member for about the last 6 months. I'm very happy to be aboard and just bring my life experience and my skill set to the organization. And I'm happy to be here with Dr. Polk and members of the MORE board and everyone that's joining us tonight. So welcome and thank you for the opportunity.
Great. And so just so everybody knows, we're going to have a conversation, Alex and Donna and I, for about half an hour to 40 minutes maximum. And then we're going to open it up so all of you can ask Donna your own questions. She's got a long, varied, and very interesting history. So she's got a lot to talk about. And so that's really how I wanted to start, Donna, was by asking you a little bit about how your own personal history or family background, how you came up, has led to your becoming who you are now and getting involved in the anti-racist work that you've been involved in over the last many decades.
Well, again, thank you for this opportunity. And I don't want to speak for a long time. And if you don't mind, I have some hot tea. I've been talking since 9 o'clock this morning. And so my voice gets really very deep and scratchy as the night goes on. But anyway, I was born in 1943 in Denver, Colorado, to Tommy Lee and Robert Hosey Mays. My father was a young sailor. He was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia at the time that I was born in Denver. And it's very interesting that before my father passed away in 2010, I found out that my parents had been married in Kimball, Nebraska. And what's so interesting about that is I often think that you end up where you may have started, whether you knew it or not. But I asked my dad, how did that happen? And he said, because he knew he was going to be drafted or join the Navy, however it ended up. And Nebraska did not have a waiting period. So my grandma and my mom and dad drove to Kimball from Denver so that they could get married. Isn't that just wonderful? So I have Nebraska roots. I mean, I'm not alleging that anything happened on the wedding night, but I'm just saying. But anyway, so my grandma took me home from the hospital, as was customary in those days, I guess. And I lived with her until I was 9 years old. And I always wanted to be like her, even though I was 9 when she died of a heart attack. To me, she was very tall, very thin, very elegant, and she had medicine. She had medicine, and people would come to our home, and she would pray for them and give them medicine that she grew outside, or she had roots and different other things. And I wanted to be like her so much because people respected her and she helped people. And so I would always sit up very tall and try to stretch myself so I could be like her. Why am I telling you this? It's because now I am with Nebraska Urban Indian Health Coalition, and we help people. And it's basically around healthcare. Now, when Karen and I talked about this, she was interested in whether or not there was anything maybe in my childhood that has led me to be engaged in some of the activities dealing with racial equity that I'm in now. Well, the thing that I think most influenced me was living in California, where we moved when I was about 3 or 4 years old to Vallejo, California, which is north. When my grandma died, I then moved to Pasadena, which is more central. And then when I had to go live with my father and stepmother, that was San Diego. So I'm telling you this, if you're familiar at all with the politics of California, the diversity of California. I grew up with a very diverse, or exposure to a diverse population of people. So I never heard things about race in my family. And I believe that people had certain skills or talents, but there was no animosity or hatred or anything that I was exposed to in my young life. And that's when I think our values are formed, Karen, is that as children, if we don't grow up hearing people talk badly about certain groups, then we have an open slate. We are allowed then to develop our own consciousness based upon our environment that we're in when that need arises. I think Christy can talk about or recall how it was living in Lincoln in the 70s when the feminist movement arrived. And we were all very active and spent hours and hours and hours trying to right the wrongs that we felt women, all women, not just white women or not just Republican women or Democratic women, but all women were exposed to. Some of them didn't even know. You know what I'm saying? They did not understand divorce laws, no-fault divorce, where a woman might end up with nothing in terms of after years of marriage, you know, no shares of property and retirement and things of that nature. You couldn't get your name in the telephone book if you were married. It had to be Mr. and Mrs. John Jones. You couldn't be Mary Jones at that same address. Mm-hmm. You couldn't get a store credit card in your name. There were just things like that that we fought for. And we won, at least in Lincoln, Nebraska. I don't know about other places in the early 70s.
So Alex, based on some of what Donna has said, did you have a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that insight and a little bit of background on your upbringing and initial experiences, Dr. Donna. Thank you so much. So that kind of segues into one of my questions, which is all that being said, and I guess everything that's occurred since then, especially in the modern day era, why do you feel racial equity is important?
Oh, well, I think our experience now, based upon what happened January 6th and some of the aftermath or fallout from that, would show the importance that if indeed people don't come together, something really bad is going to happen, is the way I see it. And I'm very, very worried about it. Let me tell you a little bit about why I'm very worried. In the early 90s, I had the opportunity to meet a young man who was investigating the Franklin Credit Union sex debacle. And he was a private investigator, and he went
Donna,
to...
just for 1 second, can you, for those of us who may not know that story, can you just real briefly describe that scandal and, you know, the impact that it had? You can go into the impact that it had.
Well, okay. In 1988, I think, 88 or 89, there was a man in the community who ran a credit union that really targeted the Black community. And there are very few people in Omaha now who are really struggling to develop a portion of the community that they think should be dedicated to the needs, economic needs of Black people. But we had a Black bank, a Black radio station, a Black credit union. Anyway, there was a scandal related to the abuse of children by some prominent males, not only in Nebraska, but some people would even say that it went all the way to the White House. But anyway, it was quite scandalous. And the legislature had an executive committee which addressed the topic. They hired a special investigator to look into it. And in the end, I think maybe 1 or 2 people ended up going to prison, but it really had very little, if anything, to do with the sexual abuse of these children. But anyway, my friend, Gary Caradori, the private eye, he went to Idaho. And when he came back, he asked me if I would order a book for him and have it sent, not even to my address, but somewhere else, because he said it was really hot and he didn't want it to be traced. Okay, so I did. And it was called The Turner Diaries. And that book has stayed with me since probably, I think it was 90 or 91 that I actually read the book, because it talks about the destruction of America because anarchy failed. And what I see now is that same roadmap, the racial divisiveness, the gun drops in communities of color, and I should say specifically the Black communities across this country, the drugs, the fentanyl that's being brought in to further destroy communities across this country. And then the talk of race wars, and just, it's very frightening to me, Alex, and that's a good question. But then I can go on and say, of course, that in probably 1990 is when I realized I was being stalked by the leader of the Ku Klux Klan in Nebraska, Larry Trapp. And he had stalked me for about 18, 19 years. And it was very frightening because I had no idea that someone would want to kill me because, as he told me later, I was a woman, I was Black, and people listened to me. And I thought about all the marches, particularly in the 70s when we marched against Vietnam. I mean, there was always something going on in Lincoln where we could protest. And I was often involved, maybe not the leader, because we had very talented women primarily who were willing to lead the protests, no matter what it was.
So Donna, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I wanted to, you know, you've talked about that a couple of times, how your own personal experience with that, the leader of the Nebraska Ku Klux Klan, and the fact that he was pursuing you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? You know, were the police involved? How did this happen? And how did you find out about it? And you know, what was the end result?
Well, you know, I was the first affirmative action equal opportunity officer in the state. I worked for the Department of Labor. That's where my office was. But I went all over Nebraska trying to encourage people to hire people who were different than them, but primarily people of color, because we were not talking about the LGBTQ community in those days. And there weren't a lot of other people of color, such as refugees or people. It was primarily African Americans, Native Americans, and Mexican Americans, as they were called back in the 70s. But anyway, so I started getting these postcards, and they were not signed, but they were written like in alternate colors, red, white, and blue. And they would say things, call me names. Well, Senator Chambers was also getting them. So I was like, I was proud. It's like, look what I got. And Senator Chambers got one too. Well, this went on, and then things changed. They changed because I wanted, when the cable company in Lincoln formed, I wanted BET to be a part of the subscription service. And I contacted the cable company, and they said no because it was too expensive. Well, lo and behold, there was a show on with Tom Metzger. Tom Metzger was a leading racist based in San Diego. And the person that was responsible for the video was Larry Trapp. And it's like, what the heck? So of course, I wrote a letter to the editor, which I did probably weekly, protesting that I couldn't get BET, but white people could get the Ku Klux Klan. Well, that brought Larry out into the open. He was furious. Well, physiologically and psychologically, he had become much more aggressive. And it was at this point when I was visiting a friend, and one of her roommates came in and she introduced me, and he said, oh, you're the woman that Larry wants somebody to kill. What? So I went to the FBI and I explained to them what happened, and they said, oh, okay, well, that's, you know, they didn't really care that much. So I went to the Lincoln Police Department. I bought a gun. First of all, I have to preface all that by saying I bought a gun. And I went to the Lincoln Police and I said, I want a license. And they said, you don't really have to have a license in Lancaster County. I want a license because if I kill somebody, I want everything to be legal. I left the police, went to the FBI office, and you know how they have that little window that you talk? I took the gun and the license and I slid it under that window, and I said, I just want you to know that somebody wants to kill me and I'm going to try to get them first. And the lady said, hold on, I'll get you an agent. So
I guess that's what it took.
Well, my life changed dramatically. I lived in the Highlands. I lived on a cul-de-sac. And in my conference with the agent, he told me that I needed to take a different route home every night. How do you do that when you live on a cul-de-sac?
So they didn't think this was important enough to pursue.
Oh yeah, they pursued it, Karen. They did, because Larry was detained because he had an outstanding traffic ticket or something like that. The man by this time was blind and he was an amputee because of diabetes. And that's what I think pushed him over the edge, was the idea that he was racist, but as long as he could see to write and threaten me, leave calls on my answering machine, which is why I don't do voicemail, for those of you who try to call me, because I can't forget how I would come in, when we had the big answering machine thing, and I would press the button, and here he would be calling me all these names and saying he was going to kill me. It was crazy.
So he was eventually detained, and that's when you had the conversation with him?
No. No. I had the conversation because the nurse who cared for him in Lincoln, they converted him to Judaism. So at a Dr. King, I think it was like meeting at the South Street Temple, and I was there representing the Buddhist community. As I was up giving my little talk, because the cantor who had made friends with Larry and converted him to Judaism, he had invited people from different religious sects to come and talk. And I'm up there talking, and I look down and I see this guy that I think that's him. So I stopped talking. I went out of the pulpit area down there, and I whispered in his ear, and I said, "Larry, I'm Donna Polk. Do you still want to kill me?" And I turned around and went right back up. I was trembling. And then I was teaching at the College of St. Mary campus in Lincoln, and I invited him to come and speak. So that's where we actually had our first conversation about why he hated me. And he also left instructions for me to give a eulogy at his funeral, because he knew he was going to die as a result of the diabetes. So that's why you often hear me say all of my enemies are dead, because one by one, people who have really challenged me in my life, because I got connections upstairs or downstairs.
Alex?
Yes, very, very powerful. I'm hanging on every word, Dr. Donna. Thank you so much. That was really insightful. I was just a wee lad. I remember the tail end of the Franklin scandal. I was but a lad, but I remember that. So very great, great stuff. And all of this, talk of the KKK, the FBI, and various law enforcement agencies and what have you, again, kind of segues into my next question for you is, what do you feel with your tenured experience and observations and those aforementioned connections, what do you feel needs to happen to really galvanize, our people of color that are most affected to respond, to participate, to engage, to come together really to address racial equity and anti-racism as a community? What is it really going to take? What needs to happen individually, collectively, on a nationwide, statewide, citywide level? If you could shed some insight on what you feel it takes really to get the union, to get the ball rolling, really to get the feet to the fire, so to speak.
Alex, that's a very, very good question, and one that I am challenged to answer, because my experience with Larry Trapp was life-changing. I rarely protest anything. I think twice before I say something controversial on Facebook, because I feel now more than ever there are people, some of whom might be in my own community, not targeting me because of what I say, but because I'm at the Mega Mart at the wrong time of night. I tell you how quickly I went and bought a gun because I thought I might have to hurt somebody before they hurt me. Now I have my little permit thing, and I have not purchased a gun because I don't want to have to shoot a Black person. You see what I'm saying? And when I see the low regard that we have for people of color, I say Black lives matter if you kill by a Black person, if you kill by a white person. If you're killed by a Black person, there's marching and praying, but where's the protest? You see? And I'm talking about right here in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm not talking about Philly or New York or whatever. I'm even very concerned about what are all these mass shootings. It could have a direct correlation to COVID-19, because COVID has done something to us that we really were not prepared for. And that was the impact of isolation. And so maybe people are responding to that. I don't know, but I am very worried because I don't see people responding in the way that I think is important to address racial equity. Let me give you an example. I say to people, because I did my dissertation on cultural competence, and I say, how can a person say that they're culturally competent or even aware when they didn't live by no people who were different from them? They didn't go to school. They definitely didn't go to church. And I'm not necessarily talking about people of color. I'm just talking about people who were different.
Well,
So
can I just wanted to jump on that, Donna, because you work at NUIHC, the Nebraska Urban Indian Health Coalition. So I'm wondering, your thoughts about not just living near people who are different, but also about how the kind of education that we're getting, the kind of, how our systems are doing in terms of helping us to understand other cultures. Do you think that we're dealing effectively, getting our kids educated effectively? Talk about what your thoughts and how you came to that.
They're not today, because I would listen to NPR in my car. But anyway, they're talking about disparities of Black women in terms of maternal issues. Why are primarily Black women dying as a result of childbirth? I see Dr. Stuhlman on the screen here, and I'm telling you, just the whole fantasy stuff about we're strong and we can stand pain and we can have a baby in the morning and be out in the cotton fields at night and blah, blah, blah. Come on now. This is 2022. Now, of course, we also have to change the gender thing because men tend to address diseases that are killing them. We need to get more women, more diversity into the research labs so we can find out what is killing us. And it's stress, typically. You see what I mean? It just fires up because there are things we could do differently if we're going to survive. Now, one thing too, you brought up about education. OPS is in trouble. OPS is in trouble. And people are fleeing the community, taking their tax base. We have a protester in the group. But anyway, so that's something we need to pay attention to. What is going on when Central High School used to be one of the best schools in the state of Nebraska and OPS doesn't even rank in the top 10? What are we going to do about that? And so, I'm not saying it's racial, but I think race has a lot to do with it.
Sharon Stuhlman, Dr. Stuhlman just put in the chat that she says, well said, perfect timing. It's the week of the young child, 3 times more likely to die regardless of education or economics. And I'm assuming you're talking, Dr. Stuhlman, about children of color?
Well, Black women in childbirth are 3 times more likely to die regardless. So you can't protect yourself by having good insurance. You can't protect yourself by being educated. The only protection that was shown was to have a caregiver that matched you ethnically or culturally. And so that's just so striking that there's something, a disregard, as Ms. Polk spoke of our this thought that, well, they're just strong, or they're I don't know, some disregard for Black women's health or over assumption on their strengths.
I just wanted to follow up really briefly, Dr. Donna, just with just a comment about that, and then just a kind of a sideline question. I've read in research studies in the New England Journal of Medicine as recent as 2015 that speak to medical instruction that speak to people of color, Black people specifically, having a higher pain tolerance, having thicker skin, and these types of fallacies and fables. So while a shocking statistic, definitely par for the course for, kind of what happens in America as far as the systemic oppression and racism. And I just had a real quick follow-up sideline question to that for you, Dr. Donna. In regards to the galvanization and what have you, what is your personal what's your personal thoughts about the absence of recognition of the Native American in America, the absence or the absence of intersectionality between the Black American and the Native American as far as the plight, the constant erosion, of oppression and racism? What do you, and obviously, being in NUIC, you have a plethora of knowledge and experience with that. So if you could just take some time to speak to that, I'd love to hear about it.
Oh my goodness. Yes. I tell you, I will ask people, do you know how Omaha got its name in Nebraska? No, they have no idea. And I even wondered to myself, why did Mutual of Omaha take down the logo that they had had for years and years and years and replace it with an animal? Well,
just 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, well, my whole thing is that I often answer questions myself because I don't have nobody else to ask. So then when I saw that they're going to build the tallest building in the state that will be lit, I thought there's no way they could do that and have a Native person looking over all the land that used to be theirs. So they'd rather have the animal. And I refuse to say the lion, okay? And I'm saying most people don't even remember Wild Kingdom. I mean, you had to have been, 100 years old like me to remember when it was on. But anyway, Alex, and one of the things I have to say to Karen, when Karen was asking me how I wanted to be called, I said, most people say Dr. Donna. And I said, that's because if I didn't have that, they'd be calling me Miss Donna. So see, Alex, how appropriate you are for a young man. You see how he's calling me Dr. Donna? But that's okay. I'm just saying to Karen, because we had this conversation.
So, Dr. Donna, I'd like to open up the conversation now and just let folks in the audience, if you've got a question for Dr. Donna, please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask anything that intrigues you or interests you.
It's Algernon. Dr. Donna, I want to ask you a question about that book you wrote. You didn't allude to that, but talk about the book you wrote about African Americans some years ago and the whole process, what you did to make that happen.
Oh, wow. I used to go around, and Algernon, me and you are the same age almost, so you can call me Donna. But anyway, I would go around the state and people would ask me, are there any more colored people like you and Senator Chambers? And I didn't really have an answer for that, seriously, because I would go speak to auxiliaries as well as to some of the mooses and elk, throughout the state.
The other animals.
They were very curious about who I was and where I was from. So I decided I would write a book. I would do research, which I got a small grant from the humanities because I didn't know how I would publish it. But I did that in 1981, I think. And the criteria I used was that the person had to have made a contribution to Nebraska. So I didn't just try to find people's uncles or grandmas or whatever. But if you look at the book, it's people that did something that, whether it was medicine, Dr. Pittman and his veterinary clinic, Judge Pittman, the first woman to serve on the bench, things like that. Mm-hmm. It was very interesting, and of course remains so because people find out about it. But one of the things I do want to say, when I traveled to the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union, I took copies of my book. So in those days, they were in the library over there, as well as in Sweden, Finland. As I stopped, I would give people my book so they could find out what people are doing in Nebraska.
Mm-hmm. That's a great story. Anybody else have a question for Dr. Donna?
Carrie, did you see the deal about the fentanyl, the cases?
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, I did. We're going to talk about that on Tuesday, the 19th, for the drug trends here in Nebraska.
Yes,
So,
she,
Dr. Donna?
yes.
Oh, sorry. This is Sharon Stulman. So I loved the question before about how we have failed our Indigenous brothers and sisters in the sense that we are, and I don't want to say, but we're not isolated, but we have one cause and then another cause, and if we were together, and I think this is maybe sort of orchestrated so that we are less powerful. How do you think we could move together in the future better so that because I felt like a little bit we would see it at Black Lives Matter protests, that there would be Native Lives Matter signs as well. But how do we better link each other? Because I do think that it was strategic for them to put us separate so that we don't fight together. But I want to change that. And what do you think are some of the steps for us to become more?
Well, you know, Dr. Stulman, we have to look at the system because Bear Hills, golly, how could I forget his first name? He was killed. Yes, he was killed by the system that has been responsible for the deaths of people across this country. You see what I'm saying? And that's what we really have to do. We have to look at the system. I have little adopted granddaughters up in Minnesota, up in Minneapolis, as a matter of fact. And they are working to make a lot of changes up there that we just don't seem to have the wherewithal to make the changes down here. I mean, the building that we are renovating in South Omaha will have a mural on the outside that will be probably the only thing in Douglas County that says Native. The only thing.
It is, it's true.
And so I'm having a phenomenal artist, Daniel Long Soldier, do that mural on the exterior of that building, on the front side, because I didn't want it on the back side where people couldn't see it. If you're in your car driving, I promise you, when you drive past 23rd and N Street, you will see a phenomenal painting by a phenomenal artist. Now, you know, I have Native ancestry, but the thing that caused me not to really talk about it, because I was raised as an African American, only because there was some issues between the slaves and the Native, and you know, there was not anger or disparaging words said about it. I didn't know why my grandmother had a serape on one wall and a velvet picture of the Last Supper on the other wall. I didn't understand why people talked about my hair being nappy and everybody else's hair in my family on the women's side was long and straight. Okay. I didn't know why that was. And I learned more about that when I was hired at the Lincoln Indian Center in 1985. I learned more about who I am there. Okay. And that is the opportunity I've been able to have being with the coalition for 30 years.
I see that there's a hand raised. Mr. King.
Hey, how you doing, doctor?
Hey, how you doing, William?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my hair just like you're looking good. The young lady talked about how we can engage. You know, of course, we built some infrastructure in the Macy tribe, but I wanted to ask you, back in, I was on a conference call with a native from California because we're looking at building across the land on native land. And talked about my mother and that she has Cherokee, you know, in her family. And back in the day, they changed the Cherokee to Negroid, so they could take their land. And so So we have it in our blood. How can we, especially if we're going to bring our communities together, how can Black folk petition current Native tribes to be part of their community by showing us the way? If we need to show blood, if we need to show, we need whatever taxes we need to do to develop that conduit of a relationship. Because my dad, I heard my grandfather is from the tribe just east of, I think they got a tribe, I forget the major city in, is it Tupelo, Alabama? Not. It's a major town. So, but it's Indian tribes all around there. And my sister said that we're natives, but how do I go to that tribe and say my great grandfather is from this tribe? And how can I prove it in order to be part of that relationship, as that young lady said, so we can work together, as Sharon said?
Well,
Because
I get this question a lot, and I suggest to people, one of the things the Mormons are probably the best in terms of looking at ancestry. But the other thing is going back to where you believe your ancestors lived and just trying to dig around to see if anybody can remember the names. You know what I'm saying? Is one way of doing it. Now, one of the things I've heard, of course, is that now with gaming, a lot of people who never even dreamed of saying anything about their ancestry now want to be a part of that because of the successes. And I'm old enough to remember when people weren't that proud of being Native. They really weren't, because of the way Natives were treated. No dogs, no N-words, no Indians, okay? You could drive clear across this country up north and not be able to stay in a hotel or a motel, all right? I tell people, young people particularly, that I can remember my dad, who was a Navy, in the Navy at the time. We would drive up to a gas station and he would say, "Can we use your bathroom?" And they'd say no. And I'm talking about St. Louis, Chicago, because we weren't there going to drive down south.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And so talking about working together, there are good-hearted people on this call, some of them whose names I know, that if there would be a way that we could come together, what are we going to do coming together? Now, I'll tell you something that I haven't had time to research it, but I heard that of LB 1024, the 450 or whatever hundreds of millions of dollars, half of it's going to South Omaha under Senator Vargas, and the other half is going to North Omaha under Senator King, Senator Wayne, and Senator McKinney.
Yeah.
And then I heard out of all that, there's going to be a video about Standing Bear. Now that can't even be possible, because they said a video, not a full-length movie. But how is that? You see what I mean? You talk about racial issues, it's in the legislature. How in the world can they not think of who are the poorest people, those living on reservations, some of them, and of course in the cities.
Yeah.
Gentrification is displacing a lot of people. And William, you've seen the little apartment complex we tried to build with 44 units. And it's not even just for natives, but people are homeless because of gentrification. People can make money tearing down or tearing up housing so they can raise the rent 3 or 4 times.
So Donna, though, Mr. King may want to ask a follow-up question, but I also have a question too, which is, you know, it seems really depressing, and Richard wanted to ask you a question. He first of all, he said it's pretty amazing to see you and that you've been one of his earliest mentors. But his question for you is, you know, given all this negativity, what actually gives you hope during these crazy times?
Well, it used to be playing poker at the Horseshoe. Well, that's true when you think about it. But now that I don't do that anymore because I gave up at COVID. But, you know, the fact that I can still get up every day after being a breast cancer survivor and having a fabulous, fabulous oncologist, fabulous, who saved my life. He saved my life. He's an exception to the rule because I think maybe because he wasn't trained in Nebraska. But anyway, that's what gives me hope. And people like you, Karen, and young Alex there, and Ajamal, and Chrissy, and the Sisters of Notre Dame. You know, let me tell you something about that. You know, I've been very upset about the genocide against children from the Native communities across this country who were put in boarding schools. And I had a call from Sister Cynthia asking me if she could come and visit our facility. And I said, well, sure. So every morning before I even put my feet on the floor, I make an intention. So that morning I said, I am not going to mention the genocide against Native kids. I'm just not going to do it because she probably had nothing to do with that. You know, I don't know that much about the Sisters of Notre Dame, but anyway, so that's the intention that I made. So she came and we were going to have lunch. And she said, before we eat, can I just say something? And I said, well, sure. Oh my God. And she started to apologize. And I really didn't know what to say. But I asked her if she would go downstairs because our elders group, the Tired Moccasins, were down there, and some of them are descendants of boarding schools because we still use boarding schools. I know you know that. And I said, would you mind just saying what you said to me upstairs? And she did. So to me, that's an example of how things can change because it was unsolicited. I had no idea about Red Cloud. I've been to Red Cloud Indian School. But I'm sorry, but.
No, it's heavy stuff, Donna. And no, your emotions are well-founded, and you know, it's deep, and it's that, you know, decades later, this stuff is burbling up and getting recognized in the press and getting national attention and international attention isn't really important. And I do think that's hopeful. And so I'm thankful to the sister and to you for witnessing.
I just want to take a moment on just to speak on that, kind of to circle around that, and Mr. King as well. What you have to understand about the intersectionality between the Black and the Native American in America, you have to understand what that means to the oppressor, to the colonizer, to the system. It's a divide and conquer tactic. House and field, reservation and city, full FBI, full-blooded Indian, mixed breed, etc. So honestly, like for yourself within your family, the single most important document I can lead you to or direct you to is called the Dawes Rolls, which is essentially, I guess you could call it a Native American census, so to speak. A lot of people have found, and this is from my own personal experience because of Black and Native American ethnicity myself, I had to do all this research in the late 90s as a teenager because I'm here to tell you, brother, they don't want to help us. They don't want to help us unite, and they don't want to help us lay claim to what we're mutually entitled to. So it's a lot of back-breaking work that you really have to incur. But I think it's important to note, you know, as was evidenced with Dr. Donna with the emotional output, that we really have to keep the light shined on not only, you know, the plight of the descendants of kidnapped African slaves, but you know, what we refer to ourselves as African Americans, but also the original people here. And we have to understand that our plight, our struggle is paralleled. I don't know of any other two groups of ethnic people in America that have such a parallel struggle of constant, consistent racism, persecution, and oppression. So that's kind of the foundation that you have to understand going into it. It's not really so much resistance from the tribes as much as people of color in Omaha and nationwide. We have to work twice as hard for half as much. So just a word about that. And thank you so much, Dr. Donna, for sharing that very powerful moment. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, you know, Doctor, they call me the crying DJ, so welcome to the club. Welcome to the club.
Well, I want to say that you're commended for getting those towers up at Macy. I have a lot of relatives up that way. And I talk to people who talk about technology, but what they fail to understand, if you don't have a smartphone or a tablet, you can't take advantage of technology. And so today I ordered 100 tablets and 100 smartphones from AT&T to distribute in the community so that people can take advantage of virtual schools, which we've got to do something about that, because the kids, they're not going to be successful. They're not going to be successful. Some of them don't even have a table to put their tablet on at home. And we have got to help our children. If we don't help our children, we are doomed. And we have got to help them in school, because school is where you learn to work.
Jamal, I see you've got a question.
Yeah. Donna, you know what amazes me, and I was going to ask you your reaction. You and I have had a chance to talk about it, but years ago, you were instrumental in trying to get that African American Commission started. And I want to know, what is your reaction down as a creative? Those also go back in days and weeks and months and years. We know the effort you went through to get through that. So what are your reactions to that newly created African American Commission? I would like to know.
You know, because I worked right across the street from the legislature, and I used to tell people the reason you can't go down on the floor now is because I used to go down there and sit beside a senator. If I wanted a bill passed, I'd just go sit down there and say, can you do this? Well, I was aware that there was the Governor's Commission on the Status of Women. There was the Mexican American Commission. I can't even remember. I don't think there was a Native Commission at the time, but I wanted to have an African American Commission. Well, Senator Chambers didn't agree with me. And he would say things like, they don't do anything. Well, the commission didn't really do anything, but they were getting tax money not to do something. So now there is one, and I don't know what they're going to do. I looked at who was appointed, and I wasn't that impressed with that, because I didn't see some grassroots on it. I saw some grass tops and some artificial grass. I'm just saying that.
Like it is.
Well, hey, and come on now. I'm just saying what God loves, and that's truth. You know, and one of the things that I'm thinking is we've got 647 nonprofits in the zip codes considered as North Omaha. Come on now. Why would a business, a profit-making business, want to locate there? Because that's saying that you got a bunch of poor people that don't have a sense of direction or money. Right? Is that right, Aljamal? No, seriously. Somebody was in my office and they argued the point, and I whipped out the sheet from the Secretary of State's office, because I said there were 600. So when I took out my sheet with the list of people, nonprofits, I said, oh, I made a mistake. It's 647. Okay.
Well, you know, 40% of all our business are made up of like nonprofits, and we'll never move forward
Exactly. Exactly.
As
And
you
of
see,
course, I run a nonprofit, but I've created jobs. I have a not affordable housing project for people to live, and not just natives. You just have to meet the income guidelines because I saw a need for housing.
right.
And I have a very supportive board of directors. And so, and I challenge people, look at our website and see how diverse we are. And I'm the DEI person where I work because I'm the person that can hire and fire. I don't need to have a special job person to do the work. I do the work.
So
Okay.
we
All
just
right.
have about
So
4 more minutes.
can I just ask something, Karen? Do I get
Yeah.
like a free meal or something for doing this?
Better than that, Donna. So we just have a couple more minutes left, and actually the Sisters of Notre Dame, they've got an action that they want to share with everybody, that they're an anti-racist action. Sister Cynthia, are you on? Well, let's see.
One of my mentees, Wyshell, is on. Hi, Wyshell.
Hey, Dr. Donna. I was trying to wait for a good time to say, hey, Dr. Donna.
Sirens are going off.
And
So-
Tim, I see you.
So I just got a note here, let's see, from the Notre Dame group that on Thursday, April 21st, they're gathering at 30th and State Street for an anti-racism silent witness from noon till 1 p.m. in case other folks are interested in joining that. Did you have anything to add to that, sister?
No, just thank you. I always have to maneuver stuff here, but thank you for making that announcement. And we specifically chose the word witness because that's what we're about. So we just want people to show up. So if you can't go, invite someone else. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I wanted to let everybody know that we are really interested in hearing your feedback about the events that we have, like the one today featuring Dr. Donna Polk. And there's an evaluation form, a link to an evaluation form in the chat. So please feel free to click on that. And we will also send that out to everybody afterwards who registered. And I'm curious if there's anybody else who has a last question for Dr. Donna.
Let me say, since there's no other questions, I do want to say that what needs to happen is that we need to come together, even if it's remotely like this. We need to have those important conversations because you never know whose mind you might change. And you never know really who you're talking to. Back in the day when we were feminists, we didn't care if you were Republican, white, black, gay. We didn't care anything, just if you were in for the cause. And I think that's what we need to see more of, are people who are in for the cause.
Dr. Donna, that is such a wonderful statement. Oh no. It's like a tornado is happening, I think.
What?
We got the sirens are going off in my neighborhood as well.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I just want to say that every time that I am around you, I am refueled in the pursuit of better. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart, because you know how every day your soul gets weary, but you are fuel for the spirit to journey on. And every time I encounter you, I feel lifted up.
Thank you, Dr. Stulman, and you all be safe. You probably need to park your car somewhere and be.
Thank you, everybody. I just also want to let you know that on Tuesday, April 26th, we'll be interviewing Joanna LaFlorigike, who is the new executive director of the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation. So keep an eye on your emails and Facebook page, and we'll send that information out today or tomorrow. Thank you, Dr. Donna, for joining us tonight. It was a delight to chat with you this evening. Please do fill out your evaluation forms. The link is in the chat. We'll send it out to you as well. And we'll stay on for a second so you can cut and paste that into your URL or whatever. So thanks again for coming tonight.
And be safe on your travels, Karen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Aho to all my brothers and sisters.
All
I'll
right,
see everyone
Alex.
soon. Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone.
Come and see me. Come and see me.
I will, absolutely. It's officially on the to-do list. I've been trying to get with John Paul down there, but he's a busy man, but I will come and see you for sure.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Donna, for all that you do, and you are very influential, and I hope you have a good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I would not be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for your encouragement.
Thank you. And you're doing great work. Great
Thank you,
work.
Dr. Donna.
Well, Shell's on the more board too, for those of you who don't.
And Carrie, we've got to get more Narcan out there. I understand this new fentanyl that they're mixing with heroin and meth is even more potent than Narcan.
And yeah, I was going to say, I just have a friend who just lost her son that way. And it's just not responding to the Narcan.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. All right now. Thank you.
Take
Thank
care. We
you.
need to get together. Cynthia, is that Michael back there?
I love all the connections that are happening.
No? Okay. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Ajmal, thank you. Karen, thank you. Great, great.
You're welcome. I'm so delighted that you joined, Carrie. Thank you.
We need to do this again.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.